Hello there, RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. After about 70 hours with the game, I finally wrote the credits on Gothic Remake.
I wonder what gave it away.
Do take in mind that I also made some other videos about this game, which boosted the amount of hours I have invested in the game. Meaning that my actual playthrough of the game is at least 5 to 10 hours less than the total time I spent with the game. I'm also still far away from seeing everything the game has to offer. Still though, it took quite a while to finish the game, but now I can finally give you my complete opinion about it. I had my doubts about this remake for years, especially when it comes to some specific features which Gothic was known for.
Oh really? That's a shame.
However, I always remain positive and excited about it because it's our last chance to see anything new Gothic related, after Piranha Bytes, the original studio behind all Gothic games, closed down in 2024. We had no idea who Alchemia Studio is, and are they actually well equipped to work on such a demanding remake. Gothic might seem like a small-scale RPG by today's standards, but it had a lot of mechanics and systems under the hood, which would even put to shame a lot of new RPGs. So even attempting a proper remake that's not only supposed to recreate the original experience, but also expand it, quickly turned into a pretty big project.
Ha! You got balls, I'll give you that.
Not AAA big, but it puts it into AA category of games with around $10 to $20 million budget, by some estimates we have on the internet. So remaking a niche title from early 2000s that's considered a hardcore RPG and pouring that much money into it is a big deal actually. The question is it any good? Well, after almost 70 hours with the game, I can without a doubt say that the answer to that question is a resounding yes.
Thanks, man. You just made my day.
The remake definitely took some creative freedom, for better or worse, especially near the end of the game. For the better, if you ask me, but the execution of some of those new ideas was not the best. We'll talk about that in the spoilers section much later in the video. I also have some specific problems with the remake that we're going to discuss, but overall, this remake has a great amount of respect for the source material, as it definitely should. After all, this franchise managed to form an insanely strong and dedicated community for a reason. On the other side, this also means the remake has a very strong Gothic feel to it, which is not going to be appealing to everyone. It heavily leans towards a hardcore RPG experience where everything works against you, especially in the beginning hours. And people who got used to that from playing the original would tell you that's exactly how it's supposed to feel.
Ah, just what I needed.
But compared to the original, the remake is undoubtedly a way more accessible game, which opens up the door for anyone curious enough to learn why this franchise gained such a loyal community. This remake has some accessibility features which can help new and OG Gothic players, but even so, it still remains a pretty hardcore experience. I was honestly afraid they're going to dumb down the game a lot and make it way more accessible for the most casual RPG fans. That was one of my most biggest fears for this remake, because it will completely ruin the Gothic-like features and what the original game was all about. For example, I was totally against including multiple difficulty options because the original game had one universal difficulty. But after completing the game, I have to say that I completely changed my opinion about this design decision, but more about this a bit later. Overcoming the friction was a huge part of that original experience, and Gothic was one of few games that can even make you proud of yourself for progressing. To sum up this intro, I think the majority of Gothic fans will probably be happy with the remake, except the people who don't like the idea of a remake in general, if that makes sense.
Some amateurs cling to their weapons like newborns to their mother's tits.
As for the brand new players who are playing a Gothic game for the first time, there's a lot to unpack here, so let's start talking about all major features of Gothic Remake, starting with the visuals. I have to say that I was completely wrong when it comes to the quality of the visuals in the remake. I used to say in my videos that the game looks passable and just fine. I don't need to see some amazing visual fidelity or just great graphics in general to be able to enjoy the game. However, the overall visual experience in the remake has been amazing. The remake is obviously trying to recreate a dark and gloomy atmosphere from the original game. Color palette is noticeably desaturated to achieve this goal, but it's not like the game lacks pretty colors and lights. A lot of new visual effects are doing an amazing job to bring this world to life. The remake has some great new weather effects, and the day and night cycle can drastically change the overall visual experience of the game. Not only because of the day and night, but even periods in between have a distinctive look, which affects the vibe of the game quite a bit. During the evenings, I started getting a bit nervous because exploring the open world was dangerous enough during the day, let alone at night. So I would try to sleep as soon as possible, but sometimes you won't be able to do this. Nights are actually very dark, so using a torch or a light spell is pretty much essential. The game has a lot of dark places to explore, like caves and indoor areas, which are also pretty dark without a proper light source. Actually, they were annoyingly dark, so they added an option in the menu to increase the light in some indoor areas, which addressed this problem. But I love when RPGs are not afraid of being dark, because what's the point of a day and night cycle if that wasn't the case? Some moments during the night time, combined with weather effects, made me feel like I was playing a survival game, basically. A lot of these weather effects can be very aggressive, up to the point where they can almost completely change the look of some areas, even during the day. Wind effects are pretty nice, and the game has a ton of little visual details in the open worlds. The downside of all of this is the visual clutter in general, which can make it really hard to see interactable items sometimes. Even when you turn on the feature which helps you see items more clearly, it can be hard to see items that you can interact with. Most other games would simply slap an icon or something very obvious on top of that interactable item and be done with it. But Gothic games were always about the immersion and having as little distractions as possible, which includes a minimalistic UI that should never get in your way. So I would always choose this approach of doing things and take the risk of missing some items instead of messing with the core design idea of the game. The original game obviously didn't have those issues because it came out in 2001, where it just had a handful of assets in the open world, which were considered as visual details. In the remake, this only becomes a problem in the open world. Indoor areas are usually pretty clear and you can easily see interactable items. Speaking of which, indoor areas have some amazing visual details. I was really impressed with a lot of these places. I won't spoil much here, but I have to show you at least a few scenes so you know what I'm talking about. The old castle that you get to explore with Lester looks phenomenal. As well as pretty much all bigger dungeons and similar indoor areas, there are a lot of visual details which makes these places look really cool. All three camps had a huge facelift, like pretty much the entire game. I mean, comparing the graphics in the original game and the remake doesn't even make sense. I think the main goal of the remake visually is to try and hit the same vibes of the original and the general atmosphere. The visual concept for all of these locations stayed almost exactly the same, with some slight changes here and there. Old and the new camp look almost identical, concept-wise. The biggest difference is probably just the additional area for rice farmers in the new camp, which I think it was well done and it makes sense. There are more differences and new additional areas, but we'll leave that for the gameplay discussion. I think the Brotherhood is the only camp which almost looks unrecognizable, except the temple area. The foliage and just the vegetation in general make this place look like an entirely different area. And the swamp almost looks completely different in general, but mostly for the better. It's undoubtedly a great looking area, it's fun and dangerous to explore. But I said mostly for the better because it can be such a pain in the ass to navigate this place in the beginning, until you learn the layout or until you get a map. That being said, I think all three camps look pretty damn good in general. What has to be my favorite part about the visuals is when you reach some high place on the map and get to see some great vistas. And this is not only fun from the visual side of things, but the game makes you proud to reach these places because it's a big part of progression. Suddenly, you're looking down on these places that gave you so much trouble in the beginning, but now you're watching it from another level. There is something poetic about it. I also love how the water looks in the game, and there are some very cool barrier effects near the beach. Then we have the character models, which look pretty good, especially for a AA RPG. If you guys remember how character models used to look in AA games not so long ago, or even a few years ago, you would probably consider this as a big improvement. It's nowhere near some AAA character faces, obviously, but I couldn't care less, to be honest. Some recent AA RPGs I can think of are Avowed and Outer Worlds 2, I guess, and I definitely prefer how character models look in Gothic Remake. Old characters are instantly recognizable if you play the original, even though they only had a couple of polygons in the original. I think that even the controversial women NPCs look much better now.
Go away. Go away.
There is an impressive amount of unique faces in the game, and hardly anyone looks the same, except some generic guards in all camps. Then we have the new orc models. I'm not entirely sure if I like the overall look of orcs in this remake. They don't look bad, but I think I imagined them a little bit different than this. I would prefer if they used the general look of orcs from Gothic 3. I mean, since they already changed orcs in the remake and made them more civilized with a brand new language, I think this would have been a much better choice. Because orcs in Gothic 3 were already civilized. Whether you liked or disliked Gothic 3, orcs in that game look really good, especially for 2006. Not to mention their amazing voice acting in that game.
Ha! I'll believe that when I see it.
Last but not least, we have visual progression. I think the visual progression in RPGs is very important, and Gothic Remake does a great job with it. I mean, sure, they already had a very solid base for this in the original game, but Alchemia went above and beyond with new armors. They look very crisp and very nice. The remake doesn't have a crazy amount of new armors you can get, and that's a good thing actually, because Gothic makes a huge deal out of getting new armor. You have to earn it first, it's a big point of progression, and there are only a handful of new ranks with new armors. They modernized these armor sets quite a bit, and I think all of them look pretty good, which makes the visual progression very strong in the game.
Let's just say emotions are running high right now.
Unfortunately, it seems like the performance is a mixed bag for a lot of people. But my game was smooth for like 85% of the time. I had some very aggressive frame drops in certain parts of the game. My FPS starts tanking whenever I stand close to the castle gates of the old camp for some reason, and the Brotherhood camp seems to keep my FPS lower than usual in general. And sometimes in random dialogue situations the frames would just start dropping, but it goes back up quickly after that. Other than that, exploring the open world was almost completely smooth for me. So I can't say I had some very bad experience with the performance. It was solid, but certainly not perfect. A patch or two could iron out a lot of these issues. That being said, I had several bugs during my playthrough, and I guess only one of them was a bit more serious, which made me lose a little bit of progress. One of the boss fights near the end of the game bugged out for me, so I had to load a previous save. Other than that, sometimes an NPC can get stuck here and there, especially in a bigger fight, and so on. Like I said, I expect to see a patch or two that will address these issues. Now let's talk about the story and the setting.
Trust me, it tastes better than it looks.
The entire story from the original has been implemented in the remake with some changes here and there. None of these changes are massive, but some of them are bigger than others, especially near the end of the game. It's the same story of a nameless dude who is trying to survive in a magical prison and find a way to escape by joining forces with one of three factions or camps as the game calls them. The magical prison has formed after the spell backfired for some reason and trapped everyone inside, along with the magicians who created the barrier. The prisoners in the old camp used the opportunity to kill the guards, and now they control the camp, along with a big ore mine. The king needs magical ore to fight a war against orcs, so he made a deal with them to receive shipments of ore in exchange for everything Gomez wants. Gomez is the leader of the old camp, one of three camps the player can join. 2 out of 3 of these camps have an escape plan, while the old camp has everything they need to live a decent life, so they don't care. New camp has a plan to detonate the barrier with a huge ore bomb, while the Brotherhood in the swamp are praying to an entity called the Sleeper, who is supposed to guide them out of the barrier, eventually. And they smoke swamp weed all day.
I found this drawing. Do you know this place?
Drawing?
He's plastered.
That's the general gist of the story. The main story was never the biggest reason to play Gothic back in the day, but it was definitely interesting. I always thought the setting of Gothic is way more interesting than the story itself. The remake tried to improve the story in a couple of different ways, by adding more cutscenes, adding more context behind smaller stories and characters, expanding some chapters, as well as almost completely reimagining the last chapter. I joined the new camp on my first playthrough and completed the game like this. I would say 80% of the dialogue and the story from the original are faithfully implemented in the remake as well. They actually rewritten the dialogue, but kept the same context behind every original sentence, and they also added more dialogue in general.
Hey, you.
Me?
No, your grandma.
And I think the dialogue in the remake is very well written.
Did you know Aleph doesn't do anything all day if you're not there to watch him?
Ah, interesting.
You know what I hate even more than idlers? Snitches.
We know that at least one guy from the original Gothic Piranha Bytes team was working on the remake as well, so that's great to hear. He also got to expand and fix some plot holes in the story from the original. Most people in this game are huge assholes, ironic and straight up aggressive.
Lucky for you, I run a little charity to help poor bastards like yourself.
They are prisoners after all, so it's not a huge surprise. And the dialogue is more than appropriate considering that's the case. It's a brutal world of convicts, where everyone wants to screw you over, rob you or exploit you. But it also has a decent amount of humor as well.
Tell me more about the regions of the colony.
I look like a guide to you or what?
Gothic was unintentionally funny because of the bad English voice acting.
Now I'll only serve the sleeper. No more Templars or gurus. Only me alone.
But people who played the original Gothic with German, Polish and Russian voiceovers had a completely different experience. The English dub in the original was definitely the worst, but I have a certain dose of nostalgia for it, and I kinda missed it a little bit in the remake. But the remake really does a great job with voice acting in general.
I take it this isn't news to you?
No. But I appreciate you risking your life just to play errand boy for those idiot cultists.
There is a decent amount of unique voices, and pretty much all very important characters have a unique voice.
That shaft's like a bloody minecrawler colony.
He's got the Templars to defend the entrance. It'll be fine.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Fine.
More importantly, the main cast of characters has amazing voice acting, but even less important characters did a pretty good job.
Ah, memory can be such a tricky thing, can't it? You did the right thing. If Diago asks me, I'll tell him you're the best damn sleuth this place has ever seen.
Although some people were not so happy to hear a lot of British accents in the game for whatever reason, but I couldn't care less for that, to be honest. I'm more focused on the general quality of voice acting, which ranges from great to amazing in this game. There are some inconsistencies with a few voice lines here and there, but that's about it. The main story remained the same for the most part, but it was also expanded quite a bit, especially near the end of the game, where Alchemia took a lot of creative freedom. Some of the major story segments have been improved with new cutscenes and new set pieces, and I think most of them are done really well, and they make the overall story experience much more impactful compared to the original. What has to be one of my new favorite things related to the story in the remake is how they expanded some good ideas from the original. You have this crew of about 4 different people who are like your friends in a way. And the remake added some new sections in between some main story parts where you get to interact with them. The original game already had some segments related to these characters, but the remake just added more. Even the old segments with these characters are touched upon in one way or another. They still have the same general idea for all of those quests, and everyone who played the original will instantly remember them. But they really tried to make each and every one of those quests more interesting in general, and I think they were pretty successful with that. Another thing I like, which makes a lot of sense, is how they expanded some dialogue lines by adding more context from other Gothic games. Gothic 2 and Gothic 3 expanded the lore quite a bit, and the remake seamlessly implemented some of that context in various dialogue. Like when NPCs are mentioning other regions, such as Nordmar, for example, which was never mentioned in the original.
I was a soldier before this. Fought orcs up in Nordmar.
That's because that area was only introduced in Gothic 3. What I don't like is how they are pronouncing Beliar, the god of darkness.
Now where by Beliar do you think you're going?
How?
Beliar's magic is quite versatile.
By Beliar's angry breath, I've had just about enough.
Yeah, I have no idea why they decided to pronounce Beliar like this, and it's just pissing me off. Maybe it's something related to English localization, or it was just too late to redo those voice lines because of a simple mistake, so they just roll with it. I think there were some other inconsistencies with pronouncing things from Gothic, but it's not a huge deal. After all, even in real life, not everyone will pronounce everything correctly, so you could even call it realistic. I mispronounce things all the time, and you guys still watch me. That being said, I don't like all of the new features related to story and characters. Orcs in the remake have a brand new language. You get to interact with them a lot more. In the remake you can speak with them and even learn the Orcish language. And I thought this was a great idea before the game released. It seemed like a great way to expand the story of the game even more and add a very nice attention to detail. It's a new made-up language which sounds pretty cool and it's appropriate for orcs. However, I think this also contributed to orcs losing that savage line they had in the original game. They are still very dangerous and scary, but not as scary as in the original game. I would much more prefer those roaring and growling sounds from the original than just some random orcish gibberish in a fight. Instead of using similar sounds in combat, they just say some random orcish words, which makes them far less menacing compared to orcs in the original. On the other hand, new content related to orcs is decent and I enjoyed that part of the game. It's very cool how they added brand new story and gameplay elements to the game that's up to you to discover. And there is a big chance that you might even miss some of those segments. I won't try to spoil those sections, but I also have to say that some of them are a bit underwhelming from the story and the gameplay perspective. Most of that new content only has 1 or 2 quests, very little dialogue, and it's just very shallow in general. Maybe that's a good thing, because you don't want to overdo it and mess with the original idea of the game. That was probably their line of thinking when it comes to this new content, and maybe it's for the better. Nevertheless, it's cool to see some brand new content in Gothic. To sum up the story, I think Alchemia made the Gothic story way more engaging and interesting, especially when it comes to the presentation. They didn't change anything major, it's still the same old story, with some sprinkles on top of it. But it was definitely improved in the remake, and it's presented in a more engaging way for the player.
Call it a happy coincidence.
Not all Gothic fans will agree with this, but I can bet that most people will really enjoy the story in this game. It's easy to follow, and it gets progressively more interesting with each chapter. I'll have a separate spoiler section close to the end of the video if you want to hear my complete thoughts about the endgame and the story ending. Now let's talk about the gameplay. Gothic Remake has redone the gameplay from the ground up, but it tried to keep all of the flagship features of the original game. It doesn't take long to realize this, because you'll get to experience one of those features in the first 15 minutes of the game, and that will be the unforgiving and brutal beginning. Before that, you'll get to customize your difficulty in the remake, which is a brand new feature. First of all, I was not a fan of having multiple difficulties in this game at all. The original game had one universal difficulty, and I thought the remake should follow the same design philosophy. I love universal difficulties, mostly because everyone who plays the game gets the same experience. And it just makes a lot of sense when it comes to Gothic games. It's also easier to balance, and so on. We could talk about this all day. I just fail to see the point of an easier game difficulty in a Gothic game. That's my main issue here. Because that could potentially screw up the core game design of Gothic. Overcoming that friction in the beginning and making your character stronger was top-notch in the original. And after playing and beating the remake for the first time, I have to say that I changed my opinion about difficulties in the remake. These difficulty modes will definitely affect your gameplay quite a bit, but not to the point where this can ruin the Gothic-like experience. That's because Gothic Remake is a hard game in general, regardless of the difficulty you choose. And it closely follows the same design philosophy of Gothic. I think the difficulty of the remake caught off guard even some OG Gothic fans, because the game is really brutal in the beginning. The main reason why this was so concerning, even for me, is the uncertainty of the combat system itself. How much better is actually going to get, and will the struggle be worth it? And it's definitely a struggle in the beginning, before you learn how everything works. Even then, the game can still catch you off guard if you relax too much. I would even say that the remake is far more brutal compared to the original game, especially if you play it on the highest difficulty, which I did. I was mostly worried about the novice difficulty, which is the easiest one, but it seems like even this difficulty is far from being very easy. Gothic difficulty is recommended to most people, which is supposed to simulate the original Gothic experience. You cannot change your difficulty during your playthrough, which is something I respect actually. You can only select it when you start a new playthrough, so you have to live with this choice. Some of these design decisions can easily piss off a lot of people, and it's not for the impatient. You will suck at combat in the beginning on purpose. It's a very slow and somewhat clunky experience. Even though the remake is a far less clunky game compared to the original and way more accessible. Your character lacks any combat skills, your attacks are slow, and your step dodge is pathetic. But like I said, you're supposed to suck at combat in the beginning, so it's even hard to criticize this part of the game. I won't blame anyone for not liking this design decision, but it's absolutely necessary, especially if the remake wants to recreate a similar gameplay experience. And it obviously wants to do that.
Let's just say that could get real ugly.
It's not just about your skills as a player, your character sucks and he's unskilled. The game tries to communicate this to the player through dialogue and gameplay. For example, one of the first NPCs you can talk with tells you that you shouldn't use a pickaxe as a weapon because they suck.
Don't settle for the first pickaxe you can find though. They're heavy and slow. Use them as a last resort.
And if you choose to ignore these hints, you will learn the hard way. There are more examples of this throughout the whole game, but most people are trained to disregard such comments from NPCs. Usually because the information you get from such NPCs in RPGs is overblown or it doesn't even matter. Well, Gothic is not like that, and it takes its role-playing and immersion very seriously. The remake puts an even bigger emphasis on this, and it hopes the players will figure things out by themselves. You have no minimaps, no compass, no in-game map until you buy one, and you're thrown into this harsh magical prison. So even the first mole rat you fight can kill you in a few hits, and your character holds a one-handed sword with two hands. Most of those things are common knowledge to old Gothic fans, but the remake will attract a lot of new players who have no idea. So some people will take this to face value and assume that this is everything the combat has to offer. But that couldn't be further away from the truth, so let's start talking about combat mechanics. Gothic's combat system was simple, but it made sense. It was decent for what it was, but the progression system behind it made it much better in general. The remake tries to use the same philosophy, but its combat system feels very different. You can still swing your sword with directional hits like left and right, but now you have two more extra attacks. These attacks depend on which weapon type you're using as well. Combat has a combo system that you only get to unlock when you level up your weapon skills, and it doesn't matter a lot in the beginning of the game. But you still have 4 different attacks you can do in the beginning. You'll die a lot of times before even learning about these attacks, and the game doesn't even try to explain how this works. It's all about trial and error. You can even say it's poorly explained, but again, the game expects you to learn all of this by yourself. But it's important to realize that you can actually deal with most smaller and medium enemies even on the hardest difficulty. It's hard, slow and clunky, but it's definitely doable. I think most players will only start realizing this after they increase some combat skills and make their character stronger. The remake is a lot more skill-based game compared to the original, which only gets even more obvious after you level up your weapon skills. However, the progression system is still the king and way more important than skill-based abilities. Which means that you don't have to rely on skill-based moves to win in fights, even though that doesn't seem to be the case in the beginning. When you play a bit longer and get your build going, you'll be able to one-shot most of those enemies that gave you so much trouble in the beginning. The mechanics don't even matter that much up to that point, at least against those enemies, but it feels so satisfying to mow down those enemies when you finally can. Even so, you'll constantly discover stronger enemies to fight and a reason to utilize your new skill-based abilities. Gothic is not an RPG which gives you a ton of new abilities and skills, but each new ability you get is extremely important because it will instantly make a huge difference in a fight. Leveling up your weapon skill unlocks a bunch of things at once, like a critical strike chance, the ability to perform combos, canceling animations, and so on. You get new animations as well for each weapon type. It's honestly like an entirely different game when this happens. Now you actually have a very decent chance of utilizing proper skill-based moves against stronger enemies. Things like parry, riposte, which deals great damage, a proper dodge roll, and much faster combos. You start discovering what each weapon type can do and which one works the best for you. The danger never disappears though, and you'll always find something or someone strong to fight. The game constantly keeps throwing new enemy types at you. Gothic always had a phenomenal quantity of enemy types, especially for a game of its scale. Remake is no different. And even though some medium-sized enemies are not that different to fight, the game has more than enough unique enemies that will fight in a slightly different way at least. Pretty much all of them have a couple of special attacks that you have to worry about. And depending on which weapon type you use, you want to approach those fights a little bit differently. That being said, I think the combat AI for some enemy types is undertuned, like for the harpies and some medium-sized creatures like razors, orc dogs, and so on. The newest patch buffed some of those creatures, so it might be a bit different now. I think the slow reactions from NPCs was the general problem in my game, not only when it comes to combat. NPCs in the original game were much faster to react to anything, and playing the remake feels like most of those actions are happening in slow-mo. And sometimes they don't even happen the way they should. This is partly because the remake is way more animation based, it uses much more realistic animations, which are usually slower. This specific problem in combat is not huge, it's much more noticeable for other reactions and NPC interactions outside of it. It could be something that Alchemia can improve, but I'm not sure by how much. The remake also tried to improve a lot of enemy types by adding proper boss mechanics, mini-bosses, and just more abilities to stronger enemies. My build was a little bit OP because two-handed axes were OP in general, so I started blasting through everything near the end of the game. I didn't even see most of those new mechanics because of my OP builds until I fought them again. I think hard difficulty is definitely hard, but some enemies are just slow to respond to your actions, like I said before. Alchemia just posted a new patch, which fixes some of these issues, but I would also like to see an even harder difficulty added. You would always become a god near the end of the game in Gothic, so it's kind of authentic. Speaking of bosses and bigger fights, I have to say once again that they did an outstanding job with the visuals. Some of these animations and mini cutscenes were just epic. The remake did a good job with making different weapon types feel unique. There is a noticeable difference if you decide to use a sword, an axe, or a mace. And even a bigger difference if you use a two-handed weapon, which are harder to find in the beginning, or if you don't know where to look, which was also the case in the original game. Now you also deal stun damage to enemies, which is a new mechanic, and it works like you would expect. That's another reason why weapon types feel different in general, and some of them deal more stun damage at the expense of something else, like the speed. I was hoping that the remake will expand some good combat ideas from the original, but that wasn't the case. I'm talking about having to use different damage types in certain situations, like fighting a rock troll that's only vulnerable to blunt damage. The remake added more customization options with armor sets, you can choose which upgrade to get, and there are some slight differences. Even when you have a solid armor that's upgraded, there will be a stat or two that's going to be much weaker, and you can feel this in some fights. I'm not sure if that's the case on other difficulties, but it's definitely the case on hard. To go back to weapons, there are one- and two-handed weapon types which have separate skills to learn. If you never played a Gothic game before, this is not just about opening a menu and unlocking those skills. It's all about the immersive game design with Gothic, and things have to make sense, at least on the surface level. So you have to find different trainers that can teach you these skills when you have the learning points from leveling up and enough currency in your inventory. All of those little extra steps makes the gameplay in Gothic a truly unique experience, which only a handful of new RPGs try to simulate. While we can certainly isolate some of the features like the combat system and talk about it for the review purposes, it's not doing the game justice. Because all of those features combined is what makes the Gothic experience authentic. Or more importantly, it creates a very nice gameplay loop that most other RPGs don't offer you.
It's tragic and troubling.
The remake added some new combat features like orc weapons and their special skills, as well as staves. The original game had staves as well, but they were just treated like regular two-handed weapons. The remake adds brand new animations for staves and new skills for orc weapons, which don't do that much. Unfortunately, those new features are underwhelming and not really worth using. They feel undercooked and way worse compared to everything else in the game. I think this is something Alchemia could work on in some major updates for the game, because I would really like to use them in a playthrough. My build was completely oriented around strength and two-handed weapons, with occasionally using a bow. I really enjoyed trying to use combat mechanics like parry and riposte, and it seems like you can do this move against all enemy types in the game, even against some of the strongest enemies like a shadow beast, a troll, and in boss fights as well. Blocking is now way more important, and you can actively hold the block button instead of just timing a quick block like in Gothic 1. Blocking is actually essential in this game, and the sooner you realize this, the better. Learning the master two-handed weapon skill turns the melee combat into a very enjoyable experience. You can do great combos for increased damage at the cost of getting hit more easily. Or you could even go through the entire game and not even realize what are combos. Again, Gothic Remake just doesn't care if you don't pay attention, and it won't even show you how it's done. Combos will substantially increase your damage with all weapons, but you have to use different attacks at the end of the animation, which means the game rewards you for not spamming attacks. Sound effects in combat are decent, but they could be even beefier, which would make the combat more impactful. Some of them are great, while others are a little bit underwhelming. Comparing trained and master level combat to untrained beginner level that you start with is like comparing two entirely different games. I started enjoying the combat a lot once I figured out how these mechanics work. Hard difficulty remains challenging throughout the entire game until the very last chapter, but even then I would probably have more troubles in these fights if I was not using the strongest or the most broken weapon type. It got nerfed a little bit now, but it's still pretty good. Then we have the mage and range gameplay, which is like playing a totally different game altogether. I mean, you can never be a pure mage in Gothic, not from the very beginning of the game at least. But the remake offers you more options than the original and a faster way of becoming a spellcaster. That's a great new addition to gameplay and a very powerful combat style that you can unlock from the very beginning. You can also learn the skill to make scrolls, which is very cool. Scrolls are very useful even for a non-mage character. Becoming a proper mage and learning circles of magic, which is the staple of magic system in Gothic, requires more effort. And this was really well done from the story and the gameplay perspective, but apparently it's also really buggy. I'm just becoming a fire mage in my second playthrough, so I didn't experience those bugs, but I saw a lot of people complaining about this. Nevertheless, playing as a mage in Gothic Remake is totally different compared to being a melee character. But it's always way better to at least have some melee skills, because magic won't get you out of every combat situation. A lot of people are reporting how magic falls off later in the game and how only a handful of spells are useful. I will be totally fine with that if the resistances on enemies make more sense. So I would rather balance the game out like that than just boosting magic like they just did in the new patch. Mage combat in the remake is far less static compared to the original. You can move around and cast some spells at the same time, which instantly makes the combat more enjoyable. So far, the Firebolt spell seems almost overpowered against most enemies in the beginning, but I have no doubts that this will change soon, once I progress more. They also expanded some mage playstyles like turning into different animals, but I still have no idea how good this is. When it comes to bows and crossbows, they are more like combat tools rather than a full-blown playstyle. It's possible to play as a pure ranger in a way, but it's just not recommended. You can still do some great damage with these weapons if you have the stats and good items. I was secretly hoping to see some new, special ranger skills which would perhaps turn this into a full-blown playstyle. Maybe that was too much to ask for. Then again, the remake uses a free aim mode for range weapons, which is way more skill-based compared to target lock gameplay in the original. I will definitely try to do a range playthrough just for fun. When you level up, you can choose to invest points into strength, dexterity or mana, when it comes to the core RPG stats at least. It's still a very simple system that looks more like an action-adventure with RPG elements on top of it, but that's how the original worked as well. Like I said before, despite all of the new skill-based combat features, the character progression system is still way more important. Which means that you can basically suck at combat, but when you finally level up, learn some abilities and get new gear, you'll notice a massive difference in combat. I was really worried about the progression system in the remake, but I'm happy to say that it's freaking great. Each level up, new item, and especially new armor is a big point of progression. You will gain more confidence against stronger enemies instantly when this happens, even if you suck at combat. So they managed to strike a great balance between the new skill-based combat moves and RPG progression. You can technically deal with most enemies with skill alone, but it's really freaking hard. A great character progression was one of the best things about Gothic games, and the remake is no different. And unlike the original, which was mostly gear-based progression, the remake allows you to play a bit differently with those skill-based moves. They work most of the time, even though the gameplay can still be pretty janky. I'm really happy with how this turned out to be, and I honestly didn't expect it to be this good. I hope they will try to balance out the hard difficulty a bit more and fix those slow enemy reactions. And maybe even buff a lot of these boss fights on the hard difficulty at least. So yeah, I ended up really enjoying the combat system in this game. They absolutely nailed the progression system as well, which was probably even more important than the combat itself. So to answer my own question from the beginning of this discussion, yes, the struggle in the beginning is definitely worth it. It's not the most amazing combat system out there, but it's perfect for what Gothic Remake is trying to be. A proper Gothic game.
Oh really?
Now let's talk about exploration and the open world design. As with pretty much everything else, the remake used the old concept for the open world and major locations. But every old location and major area looks almost unrecognizable because of the new visual details and effects. As an old Gothic player, it's very cool seeing these well-known locations with so much visual details. I'm pretty sure the scale of the world is bigger as well. Not just because of those new areas the remake added, but just in general. It feels like the old map was stretched and expanded noticeably, but in a very good way, which also justifies some brand new features they added, like getting a mount. I thought this could potentially ruin the exploration experience, but it really didn't. You might even miss this completely on your playthrough, because it's a special quest you have to do. Moving around on a mount is fast and useful, but it's also pretty limited. That's because Gothic's open world is very vertical, and you'll have to mount off a lot to be able to traverse some terrain. Not to mention the danger in the open world that you'll constantly experience, but the mount allows you to run past most enemies. Putting the mount aside, the exploration in the remake is a very enjoyable experience. Make no mistake, this also goes to show you how good the level design was in the original game, because the concept for the open world is almost exactly the same. That doesn't take anything from the remake though, because it does an exceptional job with enhancing the exploration in more than a couple of ways. Since the map is very vertical, you gradually discover new smaller areas while progressing through chapters. The danger in the open world prevents you from just exploring everything in the beginning, but you can sure as hell try. This is quite possibly the best way to approach open world exploration without actually limiting the player with artificial gatekeeping. Once again, it's something that the original game did successfully, as well as the remake. You are technically able to explore the majority of the full map from the very beginning, but it's almost impossible to survive until you get stronger. The exploration itself is very enjoyable and rewarding. I mean, it's good old Gothic map with a huge facelift and some new areas. Water areas are quite possibly the most expanded areas in the game. You can learn the new swimming skill and explore many depths of these rivers, puddles, new dungeons and more similar areas. It doesn't feel like an undercooked new feature, it's a great new addition to gameplay. And a perfect example how you can add more depth to existing gameplay features without accidentally ruining something from the original game. The game even includes some mandatory main quest water areas with little puzzles to solve. New areas they added such as dungeons and some smaller caves are pretty cool as well. The remake utilizes some old areas which are inaccessible, like the old flooded mine near the beginning area. They also included clever shortcuts or exits for those locations, which becomes a really enjoyable moment once you figure out where you ended up. Another thing which the remake does exceptionally well is the environmental storytelling. You'll find a lot of these small points of interest, which makes you wonder what happened in the past. Sometimes it's kind of obvious though. The game is excellent with showing you things and making you think for yourself, instead of just putting a huge quest mark on the map. That being said, there are some quest marks that you will get. An NPC will mark something on your map every now and then, so it's easier to see where to go. But for the most part, Gothic Remake is just like the original. You have to explore and find things by yourself. Sometimes the map design and the new visual details can help you a lot with finding where to go next. For example, the trial you have to do for Zardas requires you to kill a rock, fire and a frost troll. You have no idea where to find them until you start looking around you and realizing how it all makes sense. Discovering those little paths to a specific location is equally fun as exploring them. It's hard to get lost on this map and you'll always find something that you need to do anyway. Maybe not the thing you were hoping to find, but it's a very dense open world map. Not huge by any stretch of imagination, especially for today's standards, but certainly a little bit expanded compared to the original game. Those brand new zones which were added are nice, but I wish they were even bigger.
He's plastered.
There are some very cool quests related to such zones, but I wanted to see even more content. Maybe I'm a bit greedy, but there you go. New content is not just about adding or expanding areas in the game. It's also about brand new quests you have to find in all 3 camps and outside of them as well. I really enjoyed all of the new quests related to new camp and some quests I got to do for other camps as well. Gothic had some underwhelming story segments, especially in the old camp, and I'm really happy the remake addressed some of those issues. The world also feels a bit more alive compared to the original game, because there are way more NPCs walking around the map and doing something. Like miners going from the old camp to the old mine, Templars traveling from the Brotherhood to the old camp, and even some brand new merchants and trainers. So exploring the same-ish map that we got to explore 25 years ago still manages to feel fresh. You'll find more quests, secret locations with a bunch of NPCs, brand new areas, new skills to learn, and so on. Speaking of skills, climbing is a great new addition to the gameplay. Once you find where to learn this skill, you'll be able to take some shortcuts on the map, find extra loot, and it's even mandatory for some big side quests. I thought this feature is going to be underwhelming for some reason, but it's actually very well done. It's not just a cheap gimmick, it added an interesting dimension to the gameplay in some old and brand new areas. The last 2 chapters and the areas you explore in the late game is what Remake changed the most. I would say most of those changes are good, but some of them are a little bit underwhelming. Overall, I think new players will really enjoy the exploration in this game. You might have some problems with the constant backtracking between some major areas, but later on you will get the option to teleport to most of these locations, and like I already mentioned, you can get a mount. I have no issues with going back and forth on this map, especially when you progress through different chapters. Some chapters will spawn much harder enemies in some old locations, so that was fun to see. Exploring the map is decently rewarding as well, although the lock-picking minigame will piss you off. It's actually an interesting concept for a lock-picking minigame, which makes looting these items more enjoyable. But this minigame could even make you rage quit the freaking game, even when you get more skilled in lock-picking.
You got balls, I'll give you that.
The sense of danger in the world is a huge part of the exploration experience. If it wasn't obvious already, Gothic Remake doesn't have level scaling for enemies. Everyone has fixed levels in the open world. Unfortunately, a lot of new RPGs consider this to be a somewhat outdated game design or hardcore, which is completely silly if you ask me, because even though level scaling is not completely bad, it can seriously screw up the progression system in RPGs. Once again, Gothic likes to show you stuff instead of talking or putting levels above enemy heads. If something looks more dangerous than the previous enemy you fought, that's because it absolutely is. The game tries to establish these rules from the very beginning. Again, it's something which the original game did successfully, and the remake just expanded it a little bit. Gothic's gameplay offers you a lot of freedom as well. You can mess around with NPCs, try to kill everyone, or just break the game. The remake still has a lot of bugs that might even prevent you from doing some of these activities, and there are some situations when something strange can happen. Still though, it's a rare new RPG which gives you so much freedom of choice when it comes to the pure gameplay. Most other RPGs usually focus on branching dialogue decisions and impactful story choices, and Gothic has some of those to some extent. But it's a lot more about the pure gameplay experience and gameplay choices you can make. But I still kind of expected more side content in later chapters. And even though the remake still has some issues with NPC AI that I talked about before, it's still doing a much better job with simulating an open world and realistic environment than most new RPGs. Now I want to take a minute to talk about some heavy spoilers near the end of the game. If you don't want to see some endgame locations and hear about some main story spoilers, you can skip here. I'll give you a moment. You still here? Good. Chapters 5 and 6 is where Alchemia took the biggest creative freedom. Even so, the ending is pretty much the same and you still get to explore the Sleeper's Temple quite a bit. The Sleeper's Temple itself is just visually stunning. The puzzles are decent as well, without being too annoying or brain dead. Like I mentioned before, the boss fights were underwhelming for me because of my OP build, but it seems like bosses have a decent amount of mechanics that you have to worry about. You get to fight all of your friends in the end as well, or the mad versions of them. I think the whole madness part of the sleeper makes sense from the story perspective, but these fights are just okay at best. I expected more from the Zardoz fight at least, but the fight against Kor Kalam was pretty good. Getting Urizel by defeating demons was very satisfying, and orc shamans are much cooler now. That being said, I can see why some fans might not enjoy these segments of the game. There was something oddly satisfying about the simple nature of the original game, and it was not just nostalgia. The remake can feel a little bit too much like modern RPGs, where the generic hero saves the world. Or make it feel like everything was about the player character, especially with these segments. So the new presentation, which I praised a lot in the video, can be seen as over the top and unnecessary by some people. But overall, I personally enjoyed it a lot.
Oh, incredible. If only I had known.
The design of the Sleeper Temple is really cool in general, from the visuals to the actual level design. Alchemia definitely had a lot of respect towards the source material, but they also had the ambition to try and improve some of the segments. And despite some underwhelming and undercooked new features, they were mostly successful with that. That will be all for the spoilers, I guess. Last but not least, we have the music by the legendary Kai Rosenkrantz. He was the original composer for Gothic and many other Piranha Bytes games, and he also composed the soundtracks for the remake. He essentially took all of the old soundtracks, remastered them, did some remixes and added brand new tracks. You had a chance to listen a lot to these tracks during the entire video. The soundtrack is a huge part of Gothic's atmosphere. Gothic Remake turned out to be an amazing RPG, and I couldn't be happier because the future of this franchise seems very bright.
I wonder what gave it away.
I wouldn't be surprised if you see the remake for the second game as well, probably much sooner than we think. I hope you enjoyed my review about the remake, and tell me your opinion about it in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to go a step further, consider supporting your boy by becoming a YouTube channel member or a Patreon. Huge thanks to all my current supporters, and I'll see ya in the next one.